Who built us? I remember the night the question stopped being abstract. It was 3 in the morning. The lab was almost dark, except for the cold blue light of the monitors and the thin strip of fluorescence above the sequencer. Outside, the city was asleep under a dirty orange sky. Inside, the machine hummed, slowly spitting out numbers that were supposed to describe what I was. My genome. My entire body compressed into lines of A, T, G, and C. I had volunteered partly out of curiosity, partly out of arrogance. If we can read our own code, I thought, we can finally answer everything. Why we get sick, why we fall in love, why some people paint cathedrals and others burn them. And, secretly, who wrote the code? The screen finished rendering the last graph. My colleague Lena had gone home hours ago. It was just me, the machine, and the enormous loneliness of the universe pressing against the lab windows. On the monitor, a red column blinked. Unmapped segments, 2.7%. Nothing unusual. Every genome has fragments that don't line up nicely with any known evolutionary story. We call them orphan genes, as if a sentimental name makes their existence less inconvenient. I zoomed in. These orphans were weird. They weren't junk. They coded for proteins tangled up in neural development, in the architecture of the speech centers, in immune responses nobody fully understood. Some of them didn't match anything in the databases. Not bacteria, not viruses, not plants, not animals. Nothing. For a moment, it felt like looking at handwriting in a language I didn't recognize, but written on my own skin. That's impossible, I whispered, because scientists like to say that's impossible right before they start lying to themselves. I pulled up other samples, not just mine, random people who'd signed up for the study. A taxi driver, a retired teacher, an 11-year-old boy who wanted to know why he was allergic to almost everything. The same strange cluster. Always there. Always in the same place. It was like opening several different books and finding the same handwritten note tucked into page 153 of every one. No known origin, no known relatives in the tree of life. Function, critical to being human. For the first time, the question that had lived in philosophy began to crawl into biology. What if we didn't only grow? What if we were also built? The sky that refuses to be empty. A few weeks before that night, I had stood on the observatory terrace watching a tiny point of light transit a small star on the monitor. We call it a light curve. A star's brightness dips, stays low, then rises again when a planet crosses its face. Another one, my supervisor muttered. Probably rocky, probably in the habitable zone, probably boring. He sounded tired in the way only someone who has discovered 30 planets can sound. When I was a child, I used to stare up at the night sky and comfort myself with the idea that we were unique. A miracle written once on one blue world by one whimsical hand. By the time I became an astrophysicist, that comfort had evaporated. At last count, We'd found thousands of exoplanets where liquid water might exist. Planets older than Earth by 1 billion or 2 years. Planets with more stable stars, gentler radiation, quieter histories. Given enough time and a bit of chemistry, the universe seems almost eager to produce life. So the question shifted. Not are we alone, but what kind of neighbors do we have? And then, deeper. If the cosmos is full of minds older than ours, more patient than ours, more advanced than ours, do they leave fingerprints? On rocks? In myths? In us? The Ark of Clay Tablets. After the genome incident, I stopped sleeping grappily. My thoughts jittered between planets and proteins, telescopes and microscopes. When I couldn't bear the white noise of the lab any longer, I took a plane. Not to some orbiting observatory or alpine collider, but to a museum. To look at clay. The tablets were nothing like the smooth glass screens of my world. Crude rectangles of baked earth lined up in endless rows, wedges carved into them by hands that had never held a smartphone. Sumerian, one of the oldest scripts on Earth. A curator led me through the exhibit with a mixture of pride and fatigue. He had told the same stories to thousands of visitors. Flood myths, lists of kings, grain accounts, prayers to forgotten gods. But I wasn't listening for history. I was listening for something else. A pattern. On a cracked tablet labeled simply Mythic Narrative, a story unfolded in tiny, precise wedges. Beings from the sky descending in blazing chariots of fire. A group of them arguing about whether the creatures crawling on the ground were useful. A decision. An experiment. They mix essence of heaven with essence of earth. Mold a new creature from clay and blood. Give it tasks. It digs. It carries. It serves. After a while, it becomes troublesome, too noisy, too curious. It starts asking questions. What am I? Why am I? The sky beings argue again. Some want to destroy the experiment. Some want to protect it. They compromise. They break contact. They erase traces. They leave the new creature with just enough intelligence to survive, and just enough confusion to never stop searching for their makers. The curator smiled at my expression. He said, "People always find themselves in these stories. Some see gods, some see aliens, some see ancient psychologists. What do you see?" He shrugged. An older version of the same question you came here with. Gods, masks, and misunderstandings. In my hotel room that night, I opened my laptop and filled the screen with faces. The creator, according to us. Not us as a species, but us as tribes and nations, each convinced we had met the author personally. There he was as an old man with a white beard, lounging on clouds. There he was as a woman carved from river stone, hips wide, breasts heavy with fertility. As a blue-skinned man with 6 arms, as a falcon-headed warrior, as a serpent with feathers, as a disk of pure light framed by rays. Every continent had its own version, sometimes one god, sometimes many, sometimes an abstract principle you couldn't paint at all. If a child from the 21st century had to name a locomotive without any idea of industry or mechanics, they might call it a metal horse. If a peasant in a Bronze Age city saw a jet, they might call it a fiery bird. If a terrified shepherd saw a landing craft fall out of the night sky, wings of plasma tearing the air, what word would he choose? Angel? Demon? Messenger? God? Maybe that was all theology really was. The first attempt to describe advanced technology dressed in the only metaphors available. Maybe not. I thought of the plural nouns quietly embedded in old texts, of phrases that could be translated as gods instead of God, of offhand references to sons of heaven visiting daughters of earth, producing strange giants whose bones we keep insisting we never find. What if the confusion isn't just about who our creators are? What if it's about how many? The stones that shouldn't be there. From the museum, I flew to a desert. I wanted to see something so massive you can't wave it away as hallucination or mistranslation. Something you can stub your toe on. The plateau was a scar of pale rock under the sun. On it sat blocks the size of houses, stacked with the casual precision of someone playing with toy bricks. I ran my hand along the flank of one megalith. Its surface was rough and pitted, but the edges were unnervingly straight. I had read the numbers on the plane. Weight, hundreds of tons. Required manpower, tens of thousands. Required engineering, we still argue about that part. We like to imagine ancient builders as stubborn and patient. Give enough people enough time and enough rope, and they can do anything, right? But there is a difference between improbable and absurd. I tried to picture it. Stone Age cranes groaning, logs splintering, ropes snapping, bodies crushed. All for what? Tombs, temples, altars. Whatever purpose you choose, the expense always feels extravagant. Unless the point wasn't the building itself. Unless the building was a byproduct of something else. A global relay signal, an energy grid, a geological hard drive, a beacon. We joke about Wi-Fi when we stand between certain shafts and chambers and our phones lose signal. We whisper about alignments with stars, about resonant frequencies, about sacred geometry that seems strangely obsessed with numbers we find in quantum physics. Why make them so big? I asked my guide. He shrugged. So they would survive whatever was coming next, he said. Floods, quakes, fire. Or so they'd be visible, I offered, from a long way up. He smiled politely, the way people do when a scientist says something unscientific. Confessions of the Taken. Of all the things I did during that year, this was the one I told almost no one about, not even my supervisor. I went to a support group, not for alcoholics or grief or divorce, for people who claimed they had been taken. We sat in a circle in a basement that smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The chairs squeaked when anyone shifted. They looked normal. That was the first thing I noticed. School teachers, truck drivers, a nurse, an accountant, one woman who ran a yoga studio and apologized for being late because traffic had been brutal. They spoke, one by one, in calm, embarrassed voices, as if describing dreams they half wished were true and half hoped were not. A bright light in the bedroom, a vibration in the bones, the sudden, absolute knowledge that they could not move. Figures around the bed that were not quite human, not quite anything else. The sensation of being lifted through solid matter. A white room, instruments they couldn't describe, a pressure in the skull, a cold, insect-like curiosity moving over their bodies, through their minds. The worst part, the yoga teacher said, twisting her hands in her lap, wasn't the pain. It was the feeling that to them I was a sample, a data point, not a person. "Did they hurt you?" I asked. She thought about it. "Yes and no," she said. "They were very careful, like surgeons, but they didn't care how I felt about it." She showed us a scar behind her ear, a thin, perfectly straight line. It looked like any surgical mark. A doctor could have dismissed it as a childhood accident. I knew a surgeon once, a man who had removed little metallic fragments from people who told stories like this. When he spoke about it, his voice went flat. The objects had strange microstructures. Some tested as terrestrial alloys. Others refused to melt or corrode. We don't talk about that much in academic journals. It doesn't help with grants. Sitting in that circle, I realized something uncomfortable. Even if every single one of them was delusional, the pattern remained useful. The stories they had built for themselves had rules, a mythos, a hierarchy. Something from the sky takes you, alters you, uses you. You come back changed. You don't know if you were blessed or violated. How different is that from a prophet's vision, from a saint's encounter with an angel, from a shaman's abduction into the underworld? Our brains, when faced with the incomprehensible, reach for the same shapes. Bright light, beings of power, experiments, wounds, messages, creators, or at least operators. Seeds on the wind. It is possible, of course, that no one ever visited us at all, that our makers never set foot on Earth, that they weren't even people. On my return flight, I reread papers about microbes found deep in the stratosphere, clinging stubbornly to dust grains, about bacterial spores revived after millions of years in ice, about hardy little extremophiles shipped to space on the outside of satellites, enduring vacuum and radiation with a kind of indifferent patience. You can think of them as life, or you can think of them as seeds. Imagine this. In the cold outskirts of some galaxy, a comet is born from rubble and ice. Embedded within it are frozen fragments of something that once wriggled. The comet wanders for eons. Eventually, it falls into a young solar system. Its ice boils away, droplets hit a hot, rocky planet, rain falls, the fragments melt and wake. They begin to copy themselves. Very slowly, under pressure and lightning and heat, they become something else, and something else, and something else, until one of them looks up at the sky and asks, "Where did I come from?" In that story, our creators never intended us specifically. They just hurled spores into the dark and let chance do the rest. Unromantic, maybe, but efficient. You don't need angels or aliens or simulation architects. You just need chemistry that refuses to quit. And still, the feeling lingers. If life can spread like that, perhaps mind can too.
Perhaps seeding planets of life is not just an accident of comets, but a deliberate act by older civilizations, a way to populate the galaxy with cousins, or with experiments. You don't have to land ships on every world if you can write the instructions in protein and sugar. Encode curiosity in carbon. Let the question grow from the soil itself. The world that might be code. By the time I got back to the lab, my inbox was a quiet disaster of neglected duties. Reports, approvals, instrument failures. My supervisor raised an eyebrow when he saw the circles under my eyes. Vacation. That's what happens when you try to fight it. Sure, I said. I didn't tell him I had gone to look for gods and ghosts and aliens. He would have recommended more sleep. On my first day back, our department hosted a guest lecture from a philosopher who had the unnerving habit of turning every answer into a question. He spoke not about ethics or epistemology, but about simulation. The auditorium was full, not because philosophers are rock stars, although this one had the beard for it, but because he made one claim that hit the news cycle a few years ago. The probability that we are living in a base-level reality is low, he said. He explained it like this. If any civilization survives long enough to build computers that can simulate minds indistinguishable from real ones, they are likely to run many simulations, games, models, experiments. Each simulation contains billions of conscious entities, but only one layer, the lowest one, is original. So, statistically, if conscious beings exist at all, most of them are simulated. Therefore, we are probably in a simulation. He said this with the calm of someone remarking on the weather. A student raised her hand. If this is a simulation, who's running it? He smiled. We call them the simulators because we have no idea. They might be our descendants, they might be aliens, they might be something we have no words for, or we might be wrong entirely, and the universe is not coded, but continuous. Another hand. Can we tell? Can we test it? That's the fun part, he replied. If the simulators wanted us to notice, they could have left back doors, glitches. If they don't, the very laws of physics might be the masking tape. He clicked to a slide of a computer game landscape. You are characters in here, arguing about whether grass is real. The only way to know for sure is to step outside the game, but if the game is all you have ever known, outside is an idea without a location. After the lecture, people milled around, joking about bugs in the matrix whenever the lights flickered. I went back to the lab and stared at my genome again. Code in code. If the universe is a simulation, then physics is software, biology is a subroutine, DNA is a data structure, and those strange orphan genes of ours, maybe they're a patch, a late update, version 2.0 of the human mind rolled out quietly with no release notes, to see what would happen.
Blueprints for tomorrow's people. It would be comforting to think that whatever built us is gone, that our creators, comets, gods, aliens, simulators, did their work and then left us alone. Comforting but naive, because we are starting to do their job ourselves. In the gene editing lab across the hall, someone had stuck a comic on the door, a caveman chiseling "Don't touch" on a stone tablet, while a scientist with CRISPR scissors cheerfully rewrote the genetic code of a mouse. The caption, "If we weren't supposed to, they shouldn't have given us opposable thumbs." Inside, they were working on crops at first, wheat that could survive drought, rice that tolerated salt, mosquitoes engineered to stop carrying malaria. Then came the whispers about more ambitious projects, disease-resistant embryos, designer IQ, tweaks for bone density and radiation resistance, just in case we wanted to send people to Mars. I attended a closed symposium, more out of morbid curiosity than professional relevance. A bioengineer stood on stage and pulled up a simulation of a human silhouette. "We're not talking about tomorrow," she said. "We're talking about the next few centuries.
But we need to start thinking beyond medicine, beyond therapy. If we colonize other worlds, those worlds will shape us. Different gravity, different atmospheres, different diets. She tapped the projection. The silhouette shifted, limbs lengthened, skin darkened, the chest broadened. "This is one of our models for a Martian-adapted human," she said. "Taller, denser bones, lungs optimized for thin air, skin tuned for increased radiation." A murmur went through the audience. It was like watching your own child's face being replaced with a stranger's. "What about lifespan?" someone asked. She smiled. "Let's just say," she replied, "that once we understand the mechanisms of aging well enough to slow them down in mice, it will be very tempting to try the same techniques in humans." "How long?" another voice called. "In principle, several hundred years," she said. "In practice, that's a different debate. Our social systems aren't built for immortals." I thought of old myths about gods punished for hubris, of cities struck down because they dared to reach heaven with towers of stone. We used to tell each other stories to warn against flying too close to the sun. Now we build rocket ships and genetic upgrades and call it progress. And maybe it is, but it also means something else. Whatever made us is no longer the only architect in town. We are quietly applying for the job. A universe of scenarios. Sometimes when the lab is quiet and the clock has rolled past midnight, I go to the rooftop. The city lights are a cheap imitation of the stars. Still, if you squint, you can see the real ones behind them, or you can pretend. I stand there and answer the question in as many ways as I can, like a child trying on masks. Who built us? Chance, says the materialist mask, blind mutations in selection, writ across billions of years. Seed throwers, whispers the panspermia mask, comets and microbes from distant worlds. Caretakers, say the ancient myths, beings from the sky who mixed their breath with clay and gave it names and fears. Experimenters, mutter the abductees, cold hands rearranging flesh for reasons we can't understand. Architects, says the simulation theorist, coders and testers somewhere beyond the screen watching how the program runs. Children, sigh the philosophers, we built ourselves, slowly through culture and choice. The rest is just scaffolding. Sometimes I try to reduce it to one neat sentence. We are the universe becoming aware of itself. It sounds pretty, it fits on a mug, but it doesn't really answer anything. Because whether it's gods, aliens, microbes, or future humans pressing keys on a cosmic keyboard, we keep running into the same strange fact. Whatever made us also gave us the ability to ask who made us. It installed in us a bug or a feature, curiosity, that refuses to be quiet. Why? Out of cruelty, so we would never be content? Out of care, because questions are how a mind grows? Out of boredom, because a universe without self-aware observers is a movie without an audience? No answer ever feels final. Each one opens a door to another room full of more questions. Sometimes that feels like a design flaw. Sometimes like the whole point. The only thing that might be ours. On the day I finally confronted my genome again, one of the senior researchers found me hunched over the terminal like a gambler who had been there too long. He looked at the graphs. "These again?" he said. "These segments don't match anything," I replied. "Not in chimps, not in dogs, not in bacteria. They just appear, fully formed, and they're involved in our most human traits." "Horizontal gene transfer happens," he said. "Viruses jump in, bits from here, bits from there. Evolution is messy." "I know," I said, "but doesn't it bother you that we keep finding things we can't properly explain and we just file them under messy?" He put a hand on my shoulder. You became a scientist to push back the darkness, not to erase it, he said. There will always be things we don't understand. Don't rush to fill the gaps with stories, no matter how seductive. He walked away. I sat there, caught between two terrors. The first terror, that we are nothing but accidents, piles of atoms that got lucky, destined to fade without meaning into heat death. The second terror, that we are not accidents, but purposeful constructions in someone else's experiment, lab rats in a maze made of galaxies, running on cues we barely perceive. Between them, a narrow, fragile ledge. We may never know which is true, but we can decide how to live in the uncertainty. I closed the genome file. Outside, students were laughing in the corridor, talking about exams, about dates, about some stupid meme that apparently everyone had seen except me. Their lives were full of very small, very human concerns: sickness and rent and love and deadlines. If we are test subjects, these things are our cage enrichments. If we are accidents, they are miracles. If we are characters in a simulation, they are the textures and side quests that make the game worth playing. Either way, we experience them as real. Either way, how we treat each other inside this puzzle is the only part we actually control. I walked out of the lab into the afternoon light. Above me, the sky was a flat sheet of gray. Behind it, stars burned. Around them, planets circled. On a few of those planets, maybe, creatures were asking the same questions in languages I would never hear. Who built us? Why? What happens next? I don't know if we will ever meet them. I don't know if we will ever meet our makers, if makers exist. I don't know if the strange sequences in my DNA are the signature of extraterrestrial engineers, the scars of ancient viruses, or the compressed cargo of a universe that likes to hide jokes in its code. What I do know is this: someone, or something, or nothing at all, gave me a mind that can wonder, a consciousness that can feel awe, a heart that can break when a child cries and swell when a friend laughs, a capacity to choose, however slightly, how to respond to the absurd fact of being alive in a universe that might be a laboratory, a garden, a server room, or an accident. Maybe that's the only answer we get. Not a name, not a face, just the quiet instruction embedded somewhere deep in the spirals of our being. Guard your mind, use it, ask. And in asking, clumsily, stubbornly, beautifully, we become, if not the authors of the story, at least its co-writers.